Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Robert, for that introduction and for your invitation to address today's conference. The quality of the agenda and the size of the turnout today is a great tribute to the effort you've put into this. I've no doubt we'll all derive something useful from today. I have seen many recognisable faces here today, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with the National Churches Trust, it may be useful if I begin by just briefly outlining our role and our remit. The Trust is an independent charity dedicated to supporting and promoting churches, chapels and meeting houses of all Christian denominations across the UK. We promote the use of churches not only as places of worship, but as social, cultural and educational resources for their local communities, and the conservation of places of worship of historic value for the use and enjoyment of future generations. We do this through the provision of direct financial assistance in the form of grants for repairs and modernisation, support, advice and information, raising awareness of the cause, and seeking to bring more resources to the sector. And we also work closely with the national network of independent county churches trusts across the country to support places of worship in their local areas. Our network of friends also helps us to stay abreast of developments affecting churches around the UK. And if you're not already a friend of the National Churches Trust, I hope that you may consider becoming one. It costs just £30 a year, and we would be pleased to welcome you. And you may have noticed some forms already outside as you came in. And if you join up today, I might be able to give you a free book, which you may have also seen as well. This year, we're marking the 60th anniversary of our foundation as the Historic Churches Preservation Trust in 1953. And since then, the Trust has provided over 12,000 grants and loans worth over £85 million in today's prices to help the UK's churches, chapels and meeting houses. And I wanted to quickly show you some recent examples of our funding to places of worship, which I hope illustrate the range of work we support. From the 19th century, a grant to St Paul in Abertoisog in Wales. I hope if there's anyone Welsh here, I hope that's okay as a pronunciation. In 2012, we awarded a £10,000 grant to this unlisted Anglican church in Monmouthshire, which sustained significant weather damage and is in need of re-rendering. And also last year, we awarded a £40,000 cornerstone grant to Grade 2 Oxton Gateway Congregational Church in Oxton in Birkenhead. This was built in 1857 to designs by William Cole, and this building has been in disuse since the 1990s, but in 2008 was bought by the Wirral Christian Centre. Our grant will help fund major repairs to the roof and high-level stone repairs. But increasingly, we are getting funding requests to help with repairs to 20th century church buildings. And in 2012, awarded a £40,000 National Churches Trust cornerstone grant to help fund repairs to a badly leaking roof at St Wilfrid's Church in Halton in Leeds. This one is Grade 2 star listed, and it's on the English Heritage at-risk register as well. And pioneering in its use of concrete vaulting, this 20th century church bridges the gap between the arts and crafts style and modernism. And also the Memorial Community Church in Plaistow in London, which is Grade 2 listed. The Memorial Baptist Church building was opened in 1922 to house the church and its welfare work. And the Memorial Community Church was formed in January 2006. The church is a vital and welcoming community hub. A £40,000 National Churches Trust grant will help fund urgent repairs to high-level brickwork on the central section of the West Front. And only on Wednesday, we welcomed the Duke of Gloucester, who came on a private tour of 3 churches, of which this was one, to have a look at first-hand at the work and the excellent projects that this church is doing, not only for the building, but also for its community, which is quite mixed. And of course, there are the medieval churches, which do make up the vast majority of the requests we receive for funding. And just two recent examples are St Botolph's Church in Boston in Lincolnshire, which is better known as the Boston Stump, one of the largest and one of the most significant historic churches in the country. In 2012, a £50,000 National Churches Trust grant will help fund the repair and restoration of the Cotton Chapel, a tribute to John Cotton, the nonconformist minister who served here from 1612 to 1633 before sailing to Boston, Massachusetts, as part of the Puritan exodus. And St John the Baptist in Little Maplestead in Essex. This unique round church dates from around 1335 and is one of only 4 round churches still in use in England. Restoration took place in the 1850s, but the design and composition of the rotunda that forms the nave remains, as do many of the earlier fittings. Following a recommendation from the Friends of Essex Churches Trust, we awarded a £5,000 partnership grant for gutters, replacement of existing rainwater goods, construction of French drains and ways, which comes entirely from voluntary contributions, helps churches, both listed and unlisted, repair leaking roofs, restore stonework, and preserve precious architectural features. It also pays for kitchens, heating and toilets, making it easier for places of worship to be used by local people for community activities such as playgroups, lunch clubs for the elderly, concerts, and other art events. And above all, we want churches to be put to good use, not just for congregations, but also for the wider community. So, in order to do all this, it's important for us at the Trust to have a good understanding of the issues with which we're dealing and of what might be described as our customers. It was this that ultimately led to us to conduct a national survey a few years ago. There's been much excellent research on the physical state of places of worship, but we found that this had often been restricted to specific parts of the UK, specific denominations, or particular building types, such as listed ones only. Similarly, there has been lots of research on the social action undertaken by faith communities, but not as much on the actual use of church buildings. Therefore, as an organisation with a remit across the UK, across all denominations, and covering both listed and unlisted buildings, we wanted to try and build a better picture and contribute to this existing data. Furthermore, as we say in the survey report, the general public has only a hazy idea, if at all, of how these buildings are run and paid for, and of their wider role beyond that of their use for worship. Assumptions can and have been made about the operation and contribution of church buildings to society. The survey sought to hear directly from those on the ground about the facts of their experiences, their successes, and their challenges. And the survey, which originated from discussions by the National Churches Trust with heritage organisations, Christian denominations, and those that look after church buildings, was conducted primarily through an online questionnaire. Developed with the support of McKinsey & Company on a pro bono basis, the survey sought information from respondents in 4 main areas. Firstly, the building and how frequently it's used. Secondly, the physical state and care of the building and its future needs. The value of the building to the local community and how it's used. And lastly, how the building is managed and financed. The survey was open to all of the estimated 47,000 Christian places of worship across the UK. And I know you have a copy of the survey report, everybody, here today on your chairs, and they contain more detail on how we went about conducting the survey and analysing the results, so I won't go into that detail here. We were greatly encouraged by the level of the response, which made it the largest exercise of its kind. The representatives of over 9,000 places of worship engaged with the survey of which around 7,200 provided a meaningful response. And participants came from all corners of the UK, from the Shetland Islands to the Channel Islands, and from Suffolk to Northern Ireland, from buildings over 1,300 years old through to those recently opened. The overall message of the survey actually was extremely encouraging. Church buildings are essential both to the UK's heritage and also to the vitality of towns and villages up and down the country. And that's something that should be noted by policymakers as they consider how to keep high streets, city centres and villages viable and alive for their communities. Having a medieval or indeed a Victorian church in your community should be seen as a positive asset which can attract people to discover history and architecture and even to enjoy a coffee in a cafe, buy food in a shop or listen to a concert. The survey found that church buildings are open and being used for both regular worship and other purposes. And it's estimated that more than 90% of the UK's church buildings hold a service at least once a week, and that nearly 80% are used for other purposes, including community activities. Church buildings are significant venues for volunteering. It's estimated that a fifth of the UK's church buildings have volunteering in the building.
And even in the less populated rural areas, more than a third have more than 20 people. Church buildings are important cultural venues and significant places for supporting children and young people. It was estimated that nearly half of the UK's church buildings are used for arts, music and dance activities, and more than half facilitate activities such as nurseries, youth groups, and additional activities for young people. Church buildings could offer more to their communities with improved space and more volunteers. That's what Anne was saying, really. Lack of a suitable space and lack of volunteer time are the main barriers to further provision of community activities. But less than 1 in 10 respondents said they felt restricted by a decision to preserve the building solely as a place of worship. Many church buildings have key facilities, but there is room for improvement. It was estimated that more than 2/3 of the UK's church buildings have toilets, but that again leaves nearly a third without provision. And listed buildings are generally less well equipped. Buildings with adequate heating, toilets, tea and coffee making facilities and so on are more likely to offer additional community activities. But the survey did reveal that a significant number of buildings are in urgent need of help, and it provided information on the costs associated with maintaining these often challenging buildings. So it found that most church buildings are in good or fair condition, though a critical number need help. So 92% of respondents said their building was in good or fair condition, but 8% said that it was poor or very poor. Buildings with a construction date between 1300 and 1699 had the low point for good condition, but the peak for fair condition. But across all time periods, the overall percentage of those in good or fair condition didn't significantly deviate. And it's also worth noting, it's interesting that this figure is broadly comparable to that produced by other exercises, including the English Heritage's assessments of those places of worship at risk, and similarly classified. It's perhaps encouraging to see that the views of those who care for the building expressed through the survey didn't diverge significantly from the professional assessment of their condition. Urgent repairs would cost an average of £80,000 to those buildings in the sample in need of them. And the 3 most commonly required repairs identified were to rainwater goods, roofs, and heating. Friends groups, following on, Trevor, from your question, friends groups that support churches are a good demonstration of community involvement and provide additional funds for church buildings. The results suggested that there are a significant number of friends groups in existence involving thousands of people,
of whom more than half are not members of the local congregation. The friends groups cited by respondents contributed an average of more than £2,000 a year for regular repairs and maintenance to their building, and almost £4,000 a year for new or major works. The National Churches Trust actively promotes the setting up of friends groups, as they provide an opportunity for interested and like-minded people, both regular worshippers and other local people, to be involved in a caring and practical part of a church's life. We found that church communities often fund the majority of their repairs themselves. What's happened to that? On average, church buildings in the sample met 85% of urgent repair needs from their own funds. Where urgent repairs exceed £50,000, this reduced to just over 2/3 of the total cost. The completion of such major works, therefore, relies on attracting other funding. Here too, the National Churches Trust is helping churches to help themselves. We've recently launched a fundraising partnership with Just Giving, which gives churches subscription-free access to the Just Giving platform. The partnership will help churches, chapels and meeting houses which have not yet taken advantage of the benefits of online and text fundraising to raise more money easily and tax efficiently.
That either can't afford or don't have the expertise to set up their own online or text donation facility. For example, if a church is fundraising to repair a roof or to install a kitchen, by setting up an online fundraising page, both local parishioners and friends, family and supporters living elsewhere will be able to contribute to the appeal easily. And if you wanted more information about that, there is some on our website at nationalchurchestrust.org and /justgiving. The survey also reports on regular maintenance matters. In the sample, maintenance had a direct positive impact on the condition of a church, and roughly a quarter of churches which do little or no maintenance are in poor or very poor condition. Church buildings which did not have regular services are more likely to be in a poor or very poor condition as well. Alongside the survey, we contacted various social bodies to understand how church buildings are used beyond regular worship, and our findings indicate that these buildings are of great value to many communities and provide affordable local venues for a wide variety of activities. Alcoholics Anonymous say that of the 4,174 venues they use nationwide, just over half are actually used church buildings. 596 out of 658 choirs, members of the National Association of Choirs, use church buildings for practice or rehearsal, which is about 90%. And an estimated 15% of all St John ambulance units in England use church buildings. The Women's Institute estimates that around 40% of their 7,000 weekly meetings occur in church buildings. And even 1 in 6 of the polling places used at the last general election in 2010 were church buildings. A very clear message from the survey was that the success or challenge of any place of worship to survive requires a combination of factors. It needs people. People with the skill, determination and vision to succeed, but also using the building and seeing that they have a stake in it. And this directly links to the other need, which I make no apologies for mentioning, and that's money. But over the last 15 to 20 years, the level of funding and support for church buildings has actually seen a relatively positive scenario. Compared with the first 20 years or so of our Trust's existence, when there were very few other dedicated sources of funding for churches available, the combination of financial support from the Heritage Lottery Fund, English Heritage, VAT rebates via the Listed Places of Worship Grant Scheme, money from the Landfill Communities Fund, and the support of other charitable trusts and foundations significantly boosted many projects and buildings. Sadly, some of these streams have now concluded or been reduced, although the continued support of the HLF and the expansion of the VAT rebate would be greatly welcomed. But the effect has been that many churches, at least compared with when the Historic Churches Preservation Trust was first created 60 years ago, are in a far better state than they have been for many years. This has also been augmented by a significant and much needed growth in the provision of information and support for those looking after churches, with increasing use of online resources. The Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings Faith in Maintenance scheme, just one example, has been a successful project in promoting good maintenance, and it was excellent to hear earlier this month that its successor project, the Maintenance Cooperatives Movement, has had major funding from the HLF confirmed. This project is an excellent example of the sector working in partnership. However, it's possible that one reason why the benign aspects of the recent funding picture have not always been apparent is that the sheer number of churches means that only a small number can ever be helped by these schemes. Therefore, the struggle remains for a considerable number of places of worship. In addition to the reduction in some sources of income to which I've referred, there's the plain fact of the matter that churches are also not getting any younger, and activity over the last few decades has seen the problems of ageing Victorian churches, many of whose fabric is reaching the end of their lifespan, added to those faced by churches built in the earlier centuries.
The growing problem of failures in rewiring and relighting that was undertaken in the 1960s and the 1970s, which doesn't comply now with modern standards, has been highlighted. The next 30 years will see those churches built to service the growth of suburbia in the first third of the 20th century reach critical points in terms of their lifespan, and so the flow of repairs will continue to expand. And many of the newer buildings, of course, are not listed. Whilst listing can place restrictions on what can be done to and with a building, there is an advantage in that listed churches are able to access a range of specific financial support unavailable to unlisted ones. And perhaps to conclude, the best way to illustrate some of the varying challenges is to look at some of those buildings which we have supported in recent years. So there's St. Peter in Walpole in Norfolk, which is Grade 1. Widely known as the Cathedral of the Fens, Walpole St. Peter's Church is one of the great Norfolk wool churches. It's a very large church comprising west tower, nave, north and south aisles, porches and chancel. It dates from the early 14th century at the base of the tower, the rest of the building being washed away by the Great Sea Flood of 1337. Reconstruction seems to have begun shortly after the flood and continued after the Black Death, with the aisles around 1425 and the south porch around 1450. The exterior is early perpendicular with decoration throughout, buttresses, string courses, battlements and even the Sanctus Bellcote. In 2011, we awarded a £20,000 grant for repairs to the chancel roof and rainwater goods. The chancel is magnificent in this church, but because it's such a big roof and so high, its restoration is a very expensive process. The chancel roof is a £200,000 project in total, and our grant will help ensure the church will remain open for generations to come. The church's roof appeal has received the personal backing of the Prince of Wales too, who has regularly visited the building and contributed to its repair. There's the Collegiate Church of St. Mary de Castro in Leicester, which is Grade 1. Founded in 1107, St. Mary de Castro stands within the precincts of the Royal Castle of Leicester, from which it gets its name and of which it was once the chapel. Sovereigns of England who came to Leicester stayed at the castle and worshipped in this church. Perhaps the last reigning monarch to worship in St. Mary's was King Richard III, and here his body may have rested briefly after the Battle of Bosworth. The church is within the conservation area
that includes the castle park area of the city. A Grade 1 listed building, it's been described as the jewel of Leicester's churches and contains much fine work. The richest display of Norman architecture is to be found in the chancel, documented by Pevsner as a showpiece of late Norman sumptuousness. The famous triple sedilia he regards as the finest piece of Norman decoration in the county. Last year we awarded the church a £40,000 grant for spire repairs. The spire of St Mary de Castro is in a desperate need of repair after 6-metre cracks were discovered on 4 of its 8 faces. Architectural engineers have been called in to install steel bands inside the 120-foot structure to save it from collapsing, and up to £500,000 may be required to fix the damage properly. And finally, St Peter and St Paul, Albuquerque in Lincolnshire, which is Grade 1. This is a church of cathedral-like proportions with a 3-aisled nave, clerestory, aisled transepts, crossing tower and large chancel. The earliest parts of the building date from the late 12th century, with significant phases of development following in the 13th, 14th and late 15th centuries. The windows at each of the cardinal points of the building are filled with an intricate curvilinear decorated tracery. In the Victorian period, the church was extensively restored by R.C. Carpenter, the chancel elaborately painted by J.G. Grace, who was a friend and collegian,
and windows installed by Carpenter, Harman and Clayton and Bell between 1852 and 1867. The medieval core of the church is complemented and enhanced by the extensive Victorian restoration scheme, which can be viewed as a significant phase in the life of the building. And there's growing interest in the church stemming from this 19th century work. We awarded a £10,000 grant in 2012 for urgent works to repair and re-roof the nave and aisle roofs, high-level stonework repair, and repairs to the rainwater goods. The need for these repairs was identified by architect Graham Cook in 2008. A second phase of repairs will include re-roofing the chancel and transepts and will look to solve subsidence issues to the south. It's also proposed to establish a project addressing the stained glass and painted chancel, and a conservation report has been commissioned from York Glaziers as a first step. So, roofs, stonework, and a crumbling spire. Just 3 examples, but fairly typical examples of the repair work that we are asked to fund for medieval churches. These examples show both the challenges faced by the medieval churches, but also how they can be approached and addressed to the benefit of the building, its worshippers, and the wider community. But projects such as these require much dedication from committed individuals, working with those who directly own and care for the buildings. The fact that so many buildings of such antiquity are still in existence and being used for their original purpose is a tremendous tribute both to the individuals who care for them and to the work of many of the organisations in this room here today. At the National Churches Trust, we're proud to have played a part in keeping churches alive over the last 60 years. Over the next 60 years, the challenge will be different and maybe even greater, but we approach it with confidence and commitment.